Biomes are distinct geographical regions with specific climate, vegetation, or animal life. They can be considered as biotic communities on a continental or global scale. Biomes can be characterized by their vegetation type or their physical environment. Each biome has characteristic appearances and properties. There are two main types of biomes. Terrestrial biomes are defined largely by sets of regional climatic conditions, while aquatic biomes are characterized by their physical and chemical environment. They tend to show much less latitudinal variation compared to terrestrial biomes. Aquatic biomes are the largest of all biomes present on Earth. The major aquatic biomes are characterized by their physical environment, their chemical environment, different geological features, the photosynthetic organisms that are present in these biomes, as well as the heterotrophic organisms present in these biomes. Based on their salt content, there are two main types of aquatic biomes. Marine biomes have more salt concentration, and it is estimated that the water can contain approximately 3% of salt. Freshwater biomes have less salt concentration, and it is estimated that the salt concentration in the water is around 0.1% or less. Some examples of aquatic biomes include oceans, rivers, lakes, and ponds. Freshwater and marine biomes can be divided or stratified into zones. The zones are defined by different features including light penetration, temperature, and depth. The upper layers of water in the aquatic biome form the photic zone. This layer obtains enough light to drive photosynthesis in the primary producers. The water below is the aphotic zone. It receives lesser light, and as we go deeper into the water, there is lesser and lesser light present in this aphotic zone. The entire water column that includes the photic and aphotic zone is called as the pelagic zone. The benthic zone is the sediment that is present underneath the water. The benthic zone is much deeper in marine biomes. Marine biomes may also have an abyssal zone. This can be found below 2,000 meters and can be up to 6,000 meters deep. No light is present in this area. The temperature of water throughout the aquatic biome does not remain the same. Hence, a temperature boundary forms that separates the warm upper layers from the cold water that is usually in the deeper layers. This is called as the thermocline. Now, when we look at the figure, we can have scenarios where in the winter time, the upper layers of water are a lot colder than the lower layer of water. However, in summertime, the opposite can happen, where the upper layers of water are warmer than the lower layers of water. Thus, the thermocline is that boundary that separates that warm upper layer from the cold layer. In the case of lakes, many lakes can undergo a mixing of their waters, which is called as a turnover. Sometimes this mixing happens once in the spring, and then it happens again in the autumn or in the fall. This turnover is important because it allows the mixing of oxygenated water from the surface with nutrient-rich water from the bottom. The water at the bottom always tends to be nutrient-rich when it comes to aquatic biomes because it contains the remains of all the dead organisms as they tend to sink to the bottom of the biome. There are different factors that can influence the distribution of different communities in aquatic biomes. These factors include the depth of the water and how much of light penetrates into the water. It also depends on the distance of the organism from the shore, as well as the position of the organisms in the pelagic or the benthic zones. In the case of marine communities, most organisms are usually present in the photic zone. This includes different types of plants and animals and other types of organisms. This zone is shallow considering the entire depth of the ocean. Below the photic zone is the aphotic zone, which can be divided into the bathyal zone and the abyssal zone. The bathyal zone has very less light that penetrates the water, and hence it is also called as the twilight zone. We can't find organisms in this zone, but they are not as abundant as the photic zone. Below the bathyal zone is the abyssal zone, where no light penetrates. Hence, there is complete darkness in this region. The abyssal zone is extensive in area, but it harbors much lesser life forms than the upper two zones. To understand the communities in the freshwater biomes, let us take the example of a lake. The lake sizes can vary from small ponds to very large lakes. Now, lakes in temperate regions tend to have a seasonal thermocline, while those in tropical regions tend to have a year-round thermocline. This basically means that the thermocline does not change as much in the tropical lakes, while it does change based on the seasons in the temperate lakes. When we look at different types of plants present in lakes, the rooted and floating aquatic plants tend to live in the shallow zone that's called as the littoral zone. The littoral zone is closer to the shore and is quite well lit. Phytoplankton, on the other hand, inhabit the more deeper parts of the lake, which is called as the limnetic zone. We don't see a lot of rooted plants out there because the water is too deep to support the rooted plants. When we look at the distribution of heterotrophs in lakes, zooplankton are usually found where phytoplankton are. These are drifting heterophores that eat or graze on the phytoplankton. Invertebrates, on the other hand, are usually found in the benthic zone. This is the sediment that is underneath the water. Fish, on the other hand, can live in any of the zones as long as there is sufficient oxygen. As strange as it sounds, lakes actually have a life cycle. Young lakes are called as oligotrophic lakes, and their characteristics are that they tend to be oxygen-rich but poor in nutrients. The primary productivity of these lakes is low because there are not as many plants as it's not very rich in nutrients. The water tends to be more clear and the lake tends to be quite deep. As time passes, an oligotrophic lake becomes a mesotrophic lake. Mesotrophic lakes are moderately rich in nutrients. This is because the few organisms that were able to grow in the oligotrophic lake are able to recycle and provide nutrients that other organisms can use. Also, these organisms will eventually die and hence provide more nutrients for other organisms to thrive on. As more and more organisms start growing in the lake, the oxygen levels tend to decrease as the depth of the lake increases. More and more sediment also gets deposited in the lake, and hence the mesotrophic lake is not as deep as the oligotrophic lake. The clarity of the water also decreases. However, there is more primary productivity in the lake. As the mesotrophic lake supports the growth of more and more organisms, it ultimately forms a eutrophic lake. Eutrophic lakes are old lakes that are in the process of dying. Some characteristics of eutrophic lakes are that they tend to be very nutrient rich. This is because of the organisms that were previously there and have died, making the soil and the sediment more rich in that lake. The oxygen levels are depleted in the deeper zones due to the decomposition of the organic matter. A lot more plants tend to grow as there is more sediments present in the lake. There are lesser and lesser aquatic animals, and the depth of the lake is greatly reduced because of the deposition of sediment. Eutrophic lakes are very susceptible to algal blooms. Ultimately, the lake will have no water left and will die. Human activity can accelerate the eutrophication of lakes. This can be done in different ways. One way is by polluting the lake with substances that are detrimental to the lake ecosystem. One example could be the industrial waste that sometimes is dumped into lakes. Another way is by introducing fertilizer runoff into the lakes. Fertilizers are commonly used in agriculture and can find their way into the lakes when it rains. Fertilizers are rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, so when the fertilizer runoff enters the lake, it increases the nitrogen and phosphorus content. This usually results in the growth of certain types of organisms, and in this scenario, they usually tend to be algal blooms. Algal blooms are detrimental to lake ecosystems because they cover the surface of the lake. By covering the surface, they deplete the oxygen levels in the lower depths of the lake, causing organisms that live there to die. These dead organisms then sink to the bottom of the lake, and there they get decomposed by microbes. For this decomposition to happen, the microbes use oxygen, and hence there's more depletion of oxygen that was scarce to begin with. Eventually, these algal blooms will die and sink to the bottom of the lake, where once again microbes will decompose them and hence deplete the lake of even more oxygen. Thus, the lake will eventually die. Hence, there is an urgent need for thoughtful water control measures so that we can save lakes and enjoy them. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about biomes and different types of biomes present on Earth. We also learned about the different types of aquatic biomes and the zones that are present in these aquatic biomes. We then learned about characteristics and features of different aquatic biomes.